The mahogany doors of Westbrook Academy had never seemed so heavy. 17-year-old Victoria Chen stood in the headmaster's office, her Hermes bag sliding off her shoulder as she stared at the string of red F's marching across her transcript like a parade of shame. Her father, billionaire tech mogul Richard Chen, wasn't shouting. That would have been easier. Instead, he sat perfectly still, the vein in his temple pulsing with the kind of quiet fury that preceded empire's crumbling. "You had every advantage," he said, his voice like ice cracking. "Private tutors, the best schools money could buy, and you've thrown it all away." Victoria wanted to explain that the tutors talked at her, not to her. That the prep school classmates treated her like a walking credit card. That every time she asked a question, teachers smiled patiently and passed her anyway because her father's donations had funded the new science wing. But the words tangled in her throat and she said nothing at all. That's when she first saw him, through the office window, pushing a yellow mop bucket down the hallway. Miguel. Santos wore navy coveralls with his name stitched in faded letters above the pocket. He paused to pick up a crumpled paper a student had missed the trash can with, tossing it properly away before continuing his steady progress down the corridor. There was something deliberate about the way he moved. Like even cleaning floors deserved his full attention. Victoria didn't know it then, but that man pushing a mop bucket was about to teach her more than 12 years of expensive education ever had. The ultimatum came that evening over untouched sushi in her father's penthouse. Pass every subject by semester's end, or forget about college, the trust fund, everything. Richard Chen hadn't built a tech empire by accepting failure, and he wouldn't start with his daughter. Victoria locked herself in her room, staring at calculus problems that looked like ancient hieroglyphics, feeling the walls of her privileged life closing in. She returned to school the next day determined to try, genuinely try, for the first time in her life. But determination without direction is just flailing. By Wednesday, she was hiding in the library after hours, crying over a chemistry textbook. When she heard the squeak of wheels on tile, Miguel appeared in the doorway with his cleaning cart, surprised to find anyone there. He was maybe 40, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and silver threading through his dark hair. "Library's closed, miss," he said gently. "I know, I'm sorry. Victoria's voice cracked. "I'm failing everything, and I don't know where to even start." Most people would have mumbled something sympathetic and moved on. Miguel set down his spray bottle and pulled out the chair across from her. "May I?" He looked at her chemistry worksheet, a problem about calculating molecular bonds. "You know what I see when I look at this? The same thing I see when I walk into a room I need to clean. You start at 0. Find the floor first, then build up from there." He pulled a napkin from his pocket and drew a simple diagram. "This molecule here? It's just atoms trying to connect. Like people, they need the right conditions, the right environment. You can't force the bond. You create the circumstances for it to happen." He explained chemistry like poetry, using metaphors about cleaning, solutions, and how soap molecules had two sides, one that loved water, one that loved oil, allowing them to bring different things together. Victoria understood more in 15 minutes than she had in 15 weeks of class. "How do you know this?" she asked, stunned. Miguel smiled softly. "I was a chemical engineer in Mexico City. Had my own lab, research position at the university. Then my wife got sick, very sick. We came here for treatment. Spent everything we had and—" He paused, the pain still visible after what must have been years. "She didn't make it. But my son David, he was 8 then. I had to start over. In a new country, my credentials didn't transfer, so I found work I could get, honest work." Victoria felt ashamed of every assumption she'd ever made about people, based on their job titles. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be curious." Miguel stood, returning to his cart. "Every problem has a 0 point, a place to begin. Find that, and everything else becomes possible." She found him the next evening. And the next. Miguel never offered. Victoria sought him out, initially with homework questions that became conversations about life, loss, and what actually mattered. He tutored her during his breaks, translating complex concepts into simple truths while mopping floors and emptying trash bins. Math is just patterns, he'd say, showing her how calculus was really about understanding change, how derivatives were simply slopes dressed in fancy notation. Start with what you know, Then take one small step into what you don't. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt seen, not as Richard Chen's daughter, not as a walking bank account, but as a human being struggling to learn. Miguel treated her failures not as character flaws, but as data points, opportunities to adjust the approach. "I failed my first 2 years of university," he told her one night, organizing her chaotic notes into a system that made sense. "Everyone said I wasn't smart enough for engineering, but I wasn't failing because I couldn't learn. I was failing because I was trying to memorize instead of understand. There's a difference." Slowly, impossibly, Victoria's grades began to climb. D's became C's. C's became B's. But more than that, something fundamental shifted inside her. She started noticing things, like how Miguel always checked on elderly Ms. Morrison in the English department, making sure her classroom stayed extra warm because her arthritis hurt in the cold. How he'd slip granola bars into lockers of students he'd noticed skipping lunch. How he kept a perfect attendance record because his son, David, was counting on that paycheck for college. One Friday, Victoria stayed late to meet Miguel and found him slumped against his cart, tears streaming down his weathered face. He tried to hide it, but she'd learned to read him like he'd taught her to read equations. "What's wrong?" "It's nothing." "I'm being foolish." But his hands shook as he gripped the mop handle. Victoria waited, using the patient silence he'd once used on her. "David got accepted to MIT full scholarship for engineering." Miguel's voice broke with pride and grief. "It's everything I dreamed for him. Everything I wanted to give him myself but couldn't. He's going to have the chances I lost. But the scholarship doesn't cover housing. And I've been saving for 3 years. And I'm still 5,000 short. And..." He stopped, embarrassed by his own emotion. Victoria's mind raced. $5,000. Her father had spent more than that on her birthday party last year. She could ask him, but Richard Chen didn't give charity to the help. He believed in meritocracy, in people earning their own way, even as he opened every door for his own daughter. But Miguel had taught her to start at zero, to find the floor before building up. And the floor here was simple. A good man needed help to give his son a future. That weekend, Victoria did something unprecedented. She sold her designer handbag collection, 12 bags she'd never really cared about, on consignment websites. She sold her limited edition sneakers, her jewelry, everything of value in her room that wasn't a necessity. Her father noticed the empty shelves but said nothing, perhaps curious to see where this strange new responsibility would lead. By Monday, she had $6,300. She put it in an envelope and left it on Miguel's cleaning cart with a simple note. "You taught me to start at zero. Let David start at MIT. V." Miguel found her that evening, envelope in hand, tears in his eyes. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" Because you're a student. This is too much." Victoria smiled, feeling more certain than she'd ever felt about anything. "You told me every problem has a 0 point. David's 0 point shouldn't be $5,000 in debt. That's just math." "Victoria, you've given me hours of your time, your knowledge, your kindness. You've treated me like I mattered, when I'd given nobody any reason to care, whether I passed or failed. This isn't charity, Mr. Santos, it's gratitude. And maybe it's also starting at zero for me, 0 assumptions about who deserves help and why." Miguel pulled her into a hug, this gentle man who'd shown her more about strength and grace than any billionaire ever had. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." The semester ended with Victoria passing every class. Her father was pleased but unsurprised. Chen's always found a way to succeed, he said, missing entirely the point of how she'd done it. But Victoria didn't need his understanding anymore. At graduation, she gave the valedictory speech, not because she'd earned top grades she hadn't, but because she'd written an essay about learning that moved the selection committee to tears. She stood at the podium in her white gown, searching the crowd until she found Miguel in his work coveralls, standing at the back of the auditorium. He'd taken his lunch break to watch. "We're taught that success means starting at the top and staying there," Victoria said. "But I learned something different this year. Real success is starting at zero, acknowledging what you don't know, finding someone brave enough to teach you, and having the courage to build from there. My greatest teacher this year didn't have an office or a fancy title. He had a mop bucket and a heart big, enough to see potential. In a failing student nobody else believed in. Miguel's face showed in the crowd, stunned and humble. David stood beside him, wearing an MIT sweatshirt, beaming with pride at his father. So to anyone who feels lost, who's failing, who doesn't know where to begin, find your zero. Start there, and find people who see your humanity, not your history. That's where real learning begins. The applause was thunderous. But Victoria only cared about two people's reactions. Miguel was crying again, and David was applauding so hard his hands must have hurt. After the ceremony, Richard Chen approached Miguel, extending his hand for the first time in 3 years of passing him in hallways. "You did something I couldn't do," he said quietly. "You taught my daughter to actually learn. I'd like to offer you a position at my company. We could use someone with your—" "Thank you, but no," Miguel interrupted gently. "I have a job. I'm good at it, and someone needs to be here for the next student who needs to start at zero." Richard Chen, for perhaps the first time in his powerful life, had no response. Victoria went on to college, not the Ivy League school her father demanded, but a state university where she majored in education. She became a teacher who saw students, really saw them the way Miguel had seen her. She taught chemistry using metaphors about connection and bonding. She started every lesson at zero. And once a month she had dinner with Miguel and David. 3 people who'd learned that humanity's greatest lessons rarely come from those with the most credentials, but from those with the most heart. That kindness is its own form of genius. And that sometimes the most important thing you can teach someone isn't on any curriculum. It's simply that they matter, they can learn, and everyone deserves someone who believes in them enough to start at zero and build them back up, one patient lesson at a time.